Broadcast. There we go. Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being with us on an almost holiday week. We appreciate you being here. I know it's almost Christmas time, so everyone's on break, but we're going to have fun tonight. No stuffy academics here, so we're going to engage you. We're going to use your brain, so welcome. My name is Grace Dent. I am the Manager of Partnerships and Events here at NSHSS. I have been planning webinars with our partners for the majority of this year throughout the pandemic, bringing you all kinds of educational content. So we're happy to be here with John from Move 38. Yeah, please tell us who you are, where you're from in the chat. The chat is open to everyone. Please interact and join us tonight. John Bobrow is here with us. He is the CEO and founder of Move 38, which is an NSHSS partner. He's an award-winning designer and technologist. He's an alumnus of the MIT Media Lab Playful Systems Group, as well as the UCLA Design. He builds tools for creativity such as Blinks that we are going to learn about tonight. It's a board game system with a mind of its own, in John's own words. He's successfully kickstarted 5 products. He's raised over $400,000 on the platform, which is amazing. He's also an avid maker, outdoors lover, and air guitar veteran, in his own words, and recently has been a TEDx thought leader on how play shapes the way we think. So John's going to teach us tonight about how play and games are important to your life and how you think and how you learn. So I'll turn it over to you, John. Take us away.
Thanks so much, Grace. This is such a treat to be on this webinar and have a chance to speak to everybody. I feel like it's hard to it's both an exciting time and a difficult time to talk about play, because some of my favorite traits of play are the fact that we get to do it in person with each other, but there's all sorts of amazing ways to play remotely as well. And I hope that if you take anything away from tonight, that you know, I've titled tonight's talk, The Unexpected Benefits of Making Games. I'm excited to share with you a bit about my journey. I did not initially set out to be a game maker, but I think by the end of this evening, hopefully you'll have a little bit of insight how you might stumble into such a thing and the kind of things you'd gain from it. So without further ado, I'm gonna try, I was showing off to Grace my awesome live stream skills, so I can transition. Oh, and actually, here's a good question. This slide looks backwards to me, but I'm just gonna make sure.
It looks good to me. Can you tell us in the chat, guys, if it is backwards to you or if it's right side? Looks good on my end.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good.
Cool. All right. So there we go. And I can still say hello on there. So I say that this is a bit of a love story at the intersection of math and design. And I think it's helpful for you to know a little bit about me and my background. And then we'll start to talk about how I got into games and the kinds of not only reasons, but also the game system that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So let me just hop into this. So a little bit on me. So so about 8 years ago, after I had finished up my undergrad in math and design, I always thought that maybe I'd end up at Pixar. Seemed like an appropriate place, one of the only places that really loved that intersection of math and art. What I ended up doing was I started building interactive museum installations. And what I was just rolling a little bit of footage of was an interactive museum installation that I had worked on for the Museum of Science and Industry. And the interactive was all about building your future city. And we used projection mapping and high-tech tools like computer vision to understand what people were doing in that space and allow them to engage with the many different systems of Chicago. And this was a really neat experience for me. This was one of the first times that instead of playing games, I actually got the opportunity to make games. And this, let me see, I'm just gonna tab through here. So my work on those projects led me to the MIT Media Lab. And while some of my time looked like this, where I spent my time assembling electronics, building hardware, and writing software, the most exciting thing I did there was I got to see how people interacted with the kinds of things I made. And I mentioned that my background was in design and mathematics. The kinds of things I made didn't always have to look super technical. One of the first ones was called Troxes, and it was kind of like an origami meets Lego building block. And this funny shape that's a triangle with these weird arms on it had the ability to connect with other pieces that look similar. And it would look like this. And so as one piece would fold up, it would connect with the other ones. And together they would build a block that could then once again be built together with others. And it was a really simple thing, right? It was very low tech. It was paper. And I got to see, this got installed at the MIT Museum. And from there, they were installed there as an exhibit, but they kept disappearing from the exhibit. People kept stealing them. And this has kind of been a common thread for me. And so from this very abstract form, I realized, okay, people are interested in these. And from, one, you can build something like this. You can build 4 of these pieces come together to make a tetrahedron. 8 of the pieces come together to make an octahedron. And they build a whole family. And you can start to put them together. I hope you can see that. I'm not sure if anybody can take a guess at what that is. I realize it's actually maybe a good use of the comment section. Awesome. Prize goes to Marquis Shaw and Vanessa in second. We are playing games tonight, so I might as well make it a game here. So, we notice that one of the things that's really interesting about building a system is people are really good at understanding, putting abstract pieces into representational forms and thinking about them. Butterflies are a really good guess as well. Another different shape, actually, yeah, it looks a lot like a monarch. And so it's not a wrong answer at all. It definitely has that. I think it's, yeah, definitely. So, we started to build these different sets out of these building blocks. And, Troxes was the first thing that actually out of school helped me to found Move 38. It was one of our first products. And it's a system where you could build all sorts of different things in non-rectilinear ways. So instead of Legos where you're building straight up and down and left and right, Troxes built on a completely different grid. This is instead of being in a Euclidean, you're working no longer in standard XY coordinates, but you're thinking about the way, for example, tetrahedrons are the same forms as proteins folding. And the octahedron is the same structure as the way that diamonds crystals are formed. Icosahedron is an unfortunately familiar one right now. The coronavirus shares some of this in common. Viruses are typically found in icosahedral forms. And it's because they're based on such simple building blocks. And so I was making things like this while at the Media Lab, but one of the other things And I guess I like this image because there's always, when you're headed in one direction with a system, the most exciting things that come about it are typically the unexpected, the things that you're not, you don't set out to build. And right here, this is larger than an icosahedron, and there's multiple ways to finish this form. And so I like kind of leaving this image of sort of looks like there's sort of a puzzle to be finished. And so my time at MIT was spent researching. I was part of a group called Playful Systems, and I was researching the ways in which collaboration emerges. And these building blocks were kind of a little bit of an abstraction of that. I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with this image. These videos on YouTube got a lot of interest in the last maybe decade or so. But what this is, and if you're seeing this for the first time, it looks like probably a really ominous cloud. But it's not a cloud. And what it is this is a murmuration. And the murmuration is of starlings, a type of bird that they flock in really unique ways, and they create these really gorgeous, they look like an organism larger than themselves. And the way these birds are working with each other is really kind of amazing, because it looks like they're all coordinated. But the bird over here is not aware of the bird way over here, yet they all work on something larger than themselves, like a type of mosaic, yeah. And yeah, so there's sort of, as you zoom out, you're seeing, right, the forest for the trees. And this kind of thinking, I wanted to know what goes into this. How does something small and singular result in something much larger than itself? How does it result in these really major effects? And so I was looking into this, and I found that there were other people who had investigated this space from a mathematical as well as an artistic standpoint. John Conway was a mathematician. He was most famous for something he made in the 1970s. He actually passed away, unfortunately, this past year. But he was a mathematician, and he created something that was a very simple rule set. He called it the game of life, and it's not the game of life that you know from the board game, even though we're getting there. He made a rule set about squares and their relationship to their direct neighbors. And he said that, well, if a single square is crowded by too many other squares, it's going to die off from overcrowding. And if a square is doesn't have enough squares around it, it's going to die off from starvation. It needs support of others. And so you can see on this really, really old screen a simulation of this rule set. And I'll show you one such rule set that I find really fascinating. And I hope that that loads. It's sort of, if that's playing correctly, you'll see something that almost looks biological. At first, it's kind of an explosion, but then you start to see little things sort of wander off and walking off. And this was something that he discovered while playing with this system. This wasn't, when he designed the rule set, he had never imagined that it would take on a life of its own. But there was this really simple rule set resulted in this really fascinating emergent behavior. And so my work was heavily inspired by this. I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. There's something very simple happening here, but there's so much to engage with, and it's taking on life like something that's very familiar to life. And so, and that just goes and goes and goes. And so that might look similar to a game that's been around for thousands of years. And that same grid structure that John Conway used, the way that he had actually thought about those rule sets was by using the game board of Go, by using a simple structure like this. And I think this is a good opportunity for me to switch over camera 2. Okay. So I hope everybody's with me on this arc. So I had this, deep interest in math and design. I got to work on interactive museum installations and work on both of those skill sets. Building those simulations, I had an opportunity to make games, and it really made me think in a different way. And it made me think in a way that was inherently different than the way I had programmed anything else or the way I had approached anything else. And there's a couple of ways to think about that. One is you're building a game, and so you have to think about the underlying principles. Remember when I showed you that flock of birds? That flock of birds was following a really simple rule set. They were following a rule set that said, if I fly in a similar direction as those right around me, that's safe. And if I stay close enough to them, that's also safe. I want to do that. But if I get too close, no good, I'm going to hit their wings. And so I need to keep a certain distance. So there's 3 rules. I'm going to stay close enough, but not too close. I'm going to fly in a similar direction of those right around me. And what emerged from that was this amazing flock. Similarly, when I was building games at the Museum of Science and Industry, we were thinking about, if I have to power the city of Chicago, I also have to be balancing that I'm not creating too much pollution. And so we were building games around the kinds of thinking you had to do when thinking about complex systems. And so at the Media Lab, I got really into not only thinking about how these simple individual parts collaborate to be something bigger and part of a system, but I was surrounded by game designers, and game designers that said, saw what I was working on. I think I'm gonna switch over to camera 2 here. So I think now's a good opportunity to share Blinks. So Blinks was based on the thesis work I did at MIT. And they're these little intelligent game pieces. They look like these hexagons. And each one of them, they respond to touch, and they communicate with their neighbors. And each one of them knows a different game. It's kind of like a board game piece or a Nintendo cartridge. And I guess to step back a moment, so I was working on these at MIT as ways to explore the kinds of things you were seeing. How do the birds react to each other? How do these emergent properties like John Conway's Game of Life, how do you start to see these larger properties or see the whole, not simply as the sum of its parts? And so, and I'm just gonna attach a couple more of these here so you can get an example of what they do. So these are intelligent game pieces, and I'm just going to load one of them up. So when I was working on this at the lab, I had built them as an open system for making these kinds of experiences, but I was surrounded by game designers. And what I was noticing is that when game designers would look at these, they go, well, what kind of an experience can I create? And how can I get people to interact with it, have fun, but as a side effect, people would be learning things by having fun. So like when I play a game of Monopoly, I'm probably learning something about economics, maybe something about maybe not the best way to become a financial steward of your house, but there's definitely learning to be had there. But it's not the reason why we play. You break out Monopoly because you want to have fun. And so let me switch over here. And the blocks are called blinks, and I'll put that in the blinks. And so it's cool, so helpful to see the questions as well. And so the way they connect, and I should actually show what a single one includes. So each one of these has a pair of magnets, and it's got a magnet that's got positive facing and then a negative facing. So the polarity is set up so that when two pieces are brought together, they're going to align perfectly. And I want to make sure, when building them, I want to make sure that they kind of hop in place and they just always connect properly. Another thing that they have on them is that they communicate using invisible light, kind of like a TV remote. And just like those birds, that flock of birds, they all communicate with their local neighbors. So when they're apart, they don't know anything about each other. And then when they attach, they all recognize each other. And you can see that by the different ways I arrange them, they're pretty smart about knowing, okay, they know the individual sides. And so, this was a system I had built for exploration, but people started to pick them up and go, okay, well, what if I make a game on them? And so I like to start with this one. This is a game made by somebody who had bought Blinks, as well as a Blinks developer kit, because it's an open source platform that you can make your own games on. And so Dark Ball is one of the games on the system. And this was actually another researcher was working on timing games. And so in Dark Ball, when you press on one side, it releases a dark ball. And the better your timing, the faster the ball comes off. And every time you miss, you take a little bit of damage. And so the first person to knock out the other person wins. And you can play that with two people. But just like John Conway's Game of Life, where he built something really simple, and then as you saw it grow and expand, it became something more. Dark Ball was not conceived for a whole bunch of people to play. It was conceived for a couple of people. But you can see that it's real easy to add more players. You can have 3 people play, or split it off into a 4-player game. And all these different ways of playing are something that are just supported by this, simple rule set. And so I think it's also helpful for me to talk a little bit about what open source is and why it's so powerful in not only this idea and why I think it's so powerful in the space of making games, but just learning in general. And so by open source, what I mean by that is that Blink's code, the code that's running on each of these, is shared freely, and that anybody can access the code and change it, modify it to their own liking, and make their own games. Most of the games at this point, actually more than half of the games that we've published for Blinks, are designed by people who own Blinks and are part of the community and are making their own games for themselves, for their friends, and then publish them and are now selling them through us, through Kickstarter, as we launch these games. And so there's now over 30 games on the platform. And the Move 38 team didn't come up with 30 games. We've hosted game jams, events where they're kind of like hackathons for building games. And within 12 to 48 hours, people are able to make games kind of like Dark Ball, And I can actually show a couple other examples here because I think it's nice to see. So like Flick Flop was a game that was invented where you have to slide and attach your blink at just the right time. Bomb Brigade was designed at one of our game jams as a drinking game, but we've also found that little kids really love it, as it's a game where you're working on and exercising timing and strategy. And games have a lot to offer in this way, but also, the thing that I'm excited to share with all of you is that they have the thing that I never expected was that the process of making games, so not only just playing games, but the process of making games opens up so many opportunities for skills to be gained, whether it be in the kind of thinking you need at your job from an administrative perspective, or whether you're a programmer. But most of the programmers I know would get their jobs not because they went to school for computer science, but because they had a hobby of programming and they picked it up out of a passion. And they got really good at it because it was something they were doing for fun. And we see a common trait of that. And there's definitely lots of value to getting a degree in computer science or learning how to program through schools. But I just have to share from my experience that lots of leading developers and leading programmers, a lot of people building their own solutions, arrive at it from a passion project, something they find fun. And games have been an entry point for me in that way. And I hope for some of you that this is also an opportunity to see that it's a really amazing space to flex creative skills. And so the last part of this that I'd like to share is I'd like to show you a little bit about how something like this is made, so what that looks like. And then we're also going to open it up for some questions. And I'm happy to answer questions on a really broad topic. So, tonight's talk is about games and the kind of things that I've learned from the process of making games and making games accessible. But I'm also happy to talk about the kinds of benefits of these kinds of games, and why thinking this way is very different than the linear thinking that you might find with other methods of either programming or other styles of gameplay. The kinds of games that come out of Blinks are particularly unique or different, or really seem to require different ways of thinking. And actually, I'm gonna load one up. So I'm gonna grab the developer tool. So this is our developer tool, and there's a little cable coming off of it. And I think this is a perfect spot for me to share my screen. Here we go. It's looking pretty good so far. Share screen. Okay. So, where'd Zoom go? I see your clever Zoom. Okay. So I think you all can see a screen shared that shows, this is a text editor. And this is not something I built. This is an open source tool called Arduino. And is anybody watching, I'm kind of curious, raise your hand if you're familiar with Arduino. Cool. Oh, and I see some more good questions coming in. So let's see. So this is a tool called Arduino. And I'll answer some questions at the end around what are the best sets to start with and what are the sets you need to program with. all of the sets actually of blinks. This is a really important thing for Move 38 in general, and means a lot to me, is that everything we build is accessible. So all of these blinks are able to learn new games and are reprogrammable. And so what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you an example of a game being loaded on here. So we're going to create a very simple example. And hopefully this doesn't look too foreign, but I think I like to start with this because I think it's easy for everybody to read together, but then also easy to get a sense of how they load onto the device. So set color, and how about we do blue? And so I'm going to press upload here, and I get the option to save. And let's see what happens. Tools. Okay. So let me actually show that one more time real quickly, because I think that's really important to see. So the way the games load, I think this is so important to see. So the way the games load is that when a single blink is held down for 3 seconds, it looks for neighbors to teach how to play its game. And then when I introduce it, I'll do that one more time. So I'm going to introduce it, and it finds each and every one of its neighbors. And it's now teaching them, kind of like school children in a yard, in like a playground. It's teaching them how to play that game. And so if you kind of squint at it, you can see there's sort of a trail, and then we'll see them all finish up. And now they all know the game that I introduced. And the game that I shared here is called Fracture. And so I'm going to stop share on that window for a moment to show that. So I've loaded up this game, and the rule set of Fracture is different than the other games we were playing. In the game of Fracture, the goal of the game is to get your color blinks touching only other color blinks. And when they do that, they celebrate by sparkling. And so if it's touching any of its own, it's not sparkling. If it's touching only other ones, it's sparkling. And the way you move in Fracture is you fracture the board, and then you snap it back together. And so that would be a good move for yellow. And the goal of the game is to get all of your pieces sparkling. And so the developer tool allows you to load games quickly onto your set. So all of the games here can be loaded the way I just showed. But as I load this up, so I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to showing the development screen. So here, if I load this sketch, which we just wrote, which said, if the button's down, I'm going to set the color red. Otherwise, I'm going to set the color to blue. And so what we're seeing happen here now is the developer blink is sharing that code with all of our blinks, and it's allowing me to prototype a game. And I'll take the moment while they're loading up. Oh, here we go. Cool. So they've all loaded up, and our code says, if the button's down, red, otherwise blue. So now I can play this like a keyboard. And so that's a really simple interaction, one that you might actually be able to create or start to think about what a game might be like just by, loading this simple rule set onto the blinks. In fact, this is kind of how the first whack-a-mole games came about, where you're going, okay, this is actually really fun to hit these. But then you can start to think about games that, whack-a-mole might not be the one that you'd go, okay, I'm really getting a lot of, I'm not really using a lot of critical thinking around whack-a-mole. However, the process of building whack-a-mole is really, really fascinating. And so I'd actually like to load that up, as I think it's a nice spot to share the game, as I think it's a pretty unexpected, has some really unexpected learnings. And so I'm going to actually look up some of these open questions. Cool. And I hope, Ankit, that I'm not sure, the time might have passed for the green light specifically and how it's working, but I'm happy to go into some more detail on that. And then I see another question about all the options on our website. And one of the things that I noted is that on our website, while all of the kits allow you to play any of the games, the best place to start is the new game system. And those are, for the holidays, we sold out on all of our channels. But they're shipping, the new game system is shipping starting in the new year. So you can pre-order your sets on the website, and those ship starting January 1st with the new game system. So let's see. So I mentioned Whack-A-Mole is not a particularly complex game. So this is Whack-A-Mole. And you'll see when red pops up, I need to hit it. But there was a really interesting challenge here. The challenge was, how do we make sure that the board is random enough that it's interesting and fun, while also ensuring that we never have a situation where all of the blinks show up with moles on them. And the process of figuring out how to get them to pop up in interesting ways meant we had to think through, from each of these pieces perspective. We had to think about how this is connected to this. And if all of my neighbors are going up, well, then maybe I shouldn't. And maybe if 4 of my neighbors are going up, well, maybe that's okay. And we had to find that right balance. And the kind of thinking that we had to do there is the same kind of thinking that those birds are doing, and is the same kind of thinking we have to do in complex systems when there are when there are emergent properties and unexpected behavior. Another thing that you might ask about is, how do you get them all to start the round together? And that's another really interesting question, which is, how do you get things to cooperate? How do you get these different, how does this one over here know anything about what this one's doing over here? And how can they work together or in sync? And so there's one last story that I'd like to tell that I think is a really nice, it's not with blinks, but I love doing this whenever giving a lecture in a physical space. I like to, let me switch over here. Whenever giving a lecture in a physical space, I love to do this exercise, and it's so neat for everybody to actually experience. It's an experience called helium stick. And the way I run the exercise, and it's a little bit of a icebreaker and team building experience. But the process is that everybody has to put both pointer fingers underneath along like a yardstick. And the rule is that you have to keep both of your fingers on the bottom side of the yardstick. So I usually have one with me. Let me see. And this is something you can try later with friends. So everybody has to put both of their fingers underneath the yardstick. And the goal is that you have to lower the yardstick to the ground. The stick itself has to be lightweight so that it's not too heavy, but everybody has to keep their fingers on the stick. And as a result, as you're trying to lower it to the ground, when everybody's keeping their fingers on the stick, inadvertently, it ends up going up. And it's really mind-numbing to see how everybody was given the task of lowering it to the ground, but by the simple act of trying to keep your finger on the stick, you're nudging it up and up and up. And I think with that, I'd like to take a couple of questions. I see a couple of technical questions coming in, and I'm happy to answer those. I'll share that. So let me switch over here. So one of the questions was, how do you charge them? And so each one of the blinks has inside of it a coin cell, a watch battery. And the watch batteries that they ship with, they have over 40 hours of gameplay. And we find that people change them once in 3 to 6 months. And mostly because the games you play with them take you, maybe your game session is an hour, and that'll lead you to 40 different play sessions. Some of the games on here are 5-minute games, so you can play over 1,000 times. One nice thing about this is that you can pop the battery out. And this is actually a really important decision for us. So on the inside, there's a little sticker that lets you know which game it was. But the reason for using a coin cell is I wanted to make sure that blinks are something that aren't a product that you can't use in 2 years' time. If you've noticed with iPhones or any other rechargeable battery, or product where you can't remove the battery, you have a very limited lifespan. And so we designed them in a way that you can use these 100 years from now with the same coin cell battery. Additionally, if you do want to use rechargeable batteries, they do make rechargeable coin cells, and you can simply put those in as well. So we've noticed some people in our community do. Most people have found that they prefer to not have to worry about keeping a charger around, and that getting about 6 months of gameplay is pretty solid. Let's see. Could it ever be possible to connect blinks to other forms of gaming? It's a great question, and something that I think is worth talking about. So one of the items on here, let me see if I have it with me. One of the sets for, I'm actually just gonna load one up so you can see an example. So I'm gonna open up Blinks Games widgets. Okay, here we go. So the question was about, can you use blinks with other, can you connect them to other forms of gaming? And yeah, we found that lots of people like to not only make games by programming, but you don't even need to program or learn to program to make your own games with them. In fact, you can make games for blinks just by creating paper rules, kind of like you'd make home rules for a game. And so included with blinks is a widgets blink. And let me see if I can load that one up. So I'm gonna load up the widgets blink. And the neat thing about the widgets blink is that the widgets blink was designed as a tool that you could use to play with other games. So it includes a dice roll, it includes a spinner, it includes a coin flip, and it includes a timer. And all 4 of those items are part of the widgets blink. And so, the first game, of course, you could play with dice would be Yahtzee. But we invented a game called Takeaway Dice, which uses the magnets of blinks, because that's something that regular dice aren't magnetic. So it incorporates the magnets of blinks into a dice game. And so here you're seeing widgets load up. When I press a single one, it rolls the dice for all of the other blinks. And you can see that a 3, a 2, a 3, a 5, and they display the number after their roll. I mentioned that there's also a spinner. So if I hold one down, they all load into this colorful spinner. And you could use this as a spinner in a game that you need a spinner for, or you could use it as a color picker for a game that you need a color picker. Or you could create a game that needs a color picker. One of the other games uses this coin flip. It's a betting game where each time you flip the coins, you're placing your bets kind of like a Price is Right to see how many gold coins or silver coins there are going to be. And then you can also split them up. They don't all have to be, so some of them can be coins. Some of them can be timers. So now these 3 are set to be timers. And I could set a timer to be a 3-minute timer, a 2-minute timer, a 4-minute timer. And so each of these timers, I start it by a double click, and then it counts down. And you get to see that one count down. And so, yeah, a little bit of a long-winded answer to that question, but game making doesn't require coding at all. It requires thinking through simple interactions and the kinds of decision making that you want people to make. And let's see. Could it ever be possible? Okay, so that was that one. Could you make them play sounds? Really good question. So the blinks themselves are, I'm not sure if you can hear it on the live stream. They have a really satisfying clack to them. Maybe I'll hold it to the, kind of like dominoes. And so the first versions actually that I made at MIT had little microphones on them. And one of the things that, so the short answer of this is blinks don't have speakers in them. And the reason for that was we wanted the constraints to be tight enough that people could focus on making games that were exciting and interesting, and that the sound was something that, was a later addition. To your point of could you make them play sounds, while these blinks don't have speakers in them, there's a couple of ways that you can actually interact with sound. So the first that I should mention is that the developer kit comes with a serial port, which allows you to connect your blinks to the computer. And so you can have your blinks interact with the computer and work like a MIDI keyboard, or lots of interesting ways to start to think about interacting with sound. The other thing that I should share is that because when you connect blinks with each other, they all have the ability to gain new skills. So if I introduce one with a speaker on it, now all of a sudden, all of them have the ability to communicate with that one with a speaker. So while these blinks don't have sound, it's definitely on the roadmap for there to be ways to add sound to games, even without the developer tool. Let's see. I also think it'd be nice to eventually have each of them be able to provide their own sounds. Marquise asks, what's my favorite blinks to play? Yeah, so I have to say, so one of the games I like breaking out, well, I should show one from the core set that I think is particularly exciting. So one of my more recent ones that's part of the game system is Paintbrush. So Paintbrush is this game. It's just really beautiful. And it's a deep thinking game. It's a game kind of like Go, but it's also easy enough to teach somebody who's, I would say, 8 years old how to play at a pretty high level. So that's maybe one of my more favorite recent games. Speed Racer is one that I like playing, where I have to I break it out with my cousins, and you have to constantly build the road ahead of the car so that you're creating road, and you got to keep the car from crashing. The road dictates which direction you need to go, and so you have to be keeping an eye out for which direction the road's going to turn. So those are two of my favorites. It's pretty tough to tell at this point. We recently had a new game added called Dragon's Lair, and that was part of our Kickstarter, and that'll definitely see the light of day in 2021. Dark Ball is the one I always break out for friends to play, and that's one of the first games I would break out to play in the game system. Let's see. Is there any way you can program the blinks to act like a piano and the sound may be coming out of the computer? Yeah, great question, Samira. With the developer tool, there is a serial port. It does require a little bit of technical knowledge, but I think it's a really cool side project and a really neat space to learn. And so the answer there is yes. Whether you have a Mac or a PC, both have the ability to receive the signal from that developer blink, this one with the cable. And I should show that this blink, because you're programming it from the computer, doesn't require a battery. It's powered from the computer itself. So a simple answer is yes, you can use the blinks to control the computer through serial communication. Let's see. What about video games? Are they exclusively tabletop games, or could they be potentially involved with PC or console systems? So the way, so right now blinks are exclusively tabletop games, in the sense that the focus is on games that you're playing with blinks, or potentially with, maybe you break out cards or you augment them in that way. I think the question is, could they be involved with a PC game or a console game like a PlayStation or a Nintendo Switch? The way blinks communicate with each other, the only way for them to communicate back to the computer is with the developer blink at the moment. One of the things that I kind of keep alluding to is that as we introduce new features for blinks, having new ways to connect to other devices is on the roadmap. And so there's definitely lots of really interesting and exciting ways to think about that. I should also note that one of the coolest parts of the process, and I think as we're talking about game making, is that there's a developer forum, and actually I should, I know what to do. So I'm actually going to share my screen on this because I think it's really cool for everybody to see, that game making is not something that kind of happens, like it's definitely a creative exercise that you can do solo, but there are lots of people that love to help with game creation. And let me see, share screen. So I'm going to share here. And forum.move38.com. So the reason why I want to show this is because it's really cool to see what other people are posting in the forum. And you can see one of the, so like people are posting new games on here. I actually haven't taken a look at this one yet. Oh, cool. Wow. Okay. So there are new games popping up on the forum. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is people post ideas up here about games that they make that they haven't coded yet, but that they're interested in help with. So somebody will post an idea like, I had this crazy idea. What if I connect, and I think this is, what if my phone uses infrared to communicate with the blinks? And so much like your question about, could I have it connect to a PC or console, people are working together to see what it would take to make that work. And because it's open source, anybody can freely make their own tools to make that happen. And in fact, this forum member has created their own library for the games. I'm going to share one more thing. Let's see, which is a Blink simulator. And so this is something that anybody can visit that's interested in developing or playing around with them, where somebody who's a friend of mine and was like, man, it'd be really cool if as a developer, I could type in here and see real quickly and just kind of prototype games in the same way. So let me see, I'm gonna throw widgets in here. And then I press run. And so now exactly what you saw on my blinks with the ones I have sitting here running widgets, the simulator allows you to prototype something like that as well. And the way we came up with for separating them is to split them about. So I think even if you're thinking about like, what could I do with these? Or can I modify some of the code from the existing games? It's definitely a different experience than thinking with them in hand. I think that's such an important part of thinking about games and gameplay is the actual experience of holding them. But the simulator definitely gives developers a really neat tool to iterate. Let's see, if they could be connected to a computer for sound, could you make them into a sort of drum pad or rhythm game? Yeah, you could definitely imagine, so it's a great idea. Maybe the next Guitar Hero is a Blinks hero, or a Dance Dance Revolution where you're doing it with your hands, or definitely. So I think there are even some nice ways in sort of a Simon or Simon Says games that could be created in that way. One of the things that I really love to share is that it's impossible for me to share blinks or break out blinks and play blinks with friends or family and not have a conversation started about, oh, cool, could a game like this exist? And I think that kind of thinking, that kind of, oh, what if I made a game like this? Is the kind of thinking that is so exciting, and so exciting about games in general is that people freely get excited about what can I make? And that making can be for exploration and for fun, but ultimately it becomes something really productive and you're really exercising all of these critical thinking skills that are so important for everything else. I saw a question of where can we buy the developer kit? And so the developer kit, the way you can get the developer kit is at move38.com under the section developer. I think on Buy Blinks, it's under a developer section. And the developer kit is the bare bones dev kit. And combining that with a game system would be like what you see here, where I have the game system blinks that comes with 9 games ready to play out of the box. And then the developer kit, and I should grab one. Let's see if I have one handy. Well, the blinks themselves come something like this. And then the developer kit has all of the tools necessary to program, which includes, this is just like the other blinks, but we keep the top off so you can see the electronics and learn from that. You can reach in and press the button. And yeah, so those are available on the website. Let's see. Is there a way to display numbers or words with blinks? Cool question. So Jacob asks if you can display numbers or words. The widgets is a good example of displaying numbers in the sense that here I've got blinks displaying numbers by showing the number of lights. However, some people have come up with really clever ways to show numbers higher than 6. So for example, in the game Dragon's Lair, at the end of the game, it reveals your score. And the way it reveals your score is it flashes to you a number of times. And the green one represents, or sorry, the red one represents the ones digit, the green one represents the tens digit, and the yellow one or gold one represents the hundreds. And so you can score up to 1,000 points. And you represent it through blinking at the user. But I think I also like to take that question and kind of point that back to you and say, what are the different ways you could think of to display numbers or words? Words is an interesting one. I think that I actually can't say that I've come up with a good way to display words, but to your question, you might be asking, could you arrange multiple of them? And then you might be able to create a way, for example, for them to scroll kind of like a ticker, kind of like a news ticker, and display words across them. So I haven't seen that done on the forum yet. And that could be a really, really cool implementation on blinks. I have to admit, I think it's a good challenge. And it's a good challenge because of their distributed nature. The task of getting them to display words together would be similar to getting a school of fish to create unique formations together. And so it's a really fascinating space to think in, but it's a really great question. And I think a really cool space to explore. Let's see. So that's a great question, Jacob. And I mentioned to Grace that I would invite her back in to do some of this Q&A with me. So I feel like now's a good time. I'm not sure if I missed items in the chat, but how do we do, Grace?
I think we got everyone. I think we got all of our questions tonight, and we're right at time. So thank you, John, so much for an excellent session. I learned how blinks worked finally, so it was great to have your tutorial. It was very informative, so thank you. Make sure to get your blinks, everyone. I know they're on back order right now, but you said they will be shipped out in January, so that's great.
Shipping in the new year, still taking orders, and yeah, Amazon sold out, but we'll be back up in the new year. But honestly, the best place is with your NSHSS discount. That's special for NSHSS. And I should actually note one more thing before we wrap, which is today I got full confirmation. So for the past month, I've been working with NYU, and I'm in this upcoming year, I'm going to be teaching a course with blinks as an adjunct professor at NYU. And I'll be sharing my materials publicly. So the work that we do in that class and around making games and thinking with blinks is something that you too can also join in. And I think the forum is going to be a great place for people to be thinking about all the exciting things to do with them. So the website for Blinks Dev Kit says not found. Okay, well that's a good thing for me to double check on, and we'll make sure that you have a live link there. I think, let me actually just respond to that here, and we can follow up. From move38.com, that should at least arrive at the developer kit.
Awesome. And we will certainly share those resources from your NYU class with the NSHSS community. We can post those on your partner page so that everyone will have access to those. That would be great, John. Thank you so much for an awesome session tonight. I hope everyone who's still tuning in with us has an awesome holiday season and safe as well. And with that, we'll say good night. Thank you, John.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a happy holidays.
You too, John. Good night.